Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Breadwinner Podcast. I am so glad you're here. As always, today's episode is going to be jam packed with super practical insights to help you build a thriving sourdough microbakery right out of your home. If you are a weekly listener tuning in right when the episodes drop, you know that today's episode is coming out on Friday instead of normal Thursday. The recording I had yesterday was a short story. Basically, it was unusable. And so I did not have time to re-record yesterday. And I am in the midst of bake day. It's a Friday right now, and I have a market tomorrow. But I didn't want to leave you hanging without an episode. So this is a little bit unconventional, but we are going to chat while I package some loaves. So if you're watching on YouTube, you're going to see me packing up my sandwich loaves. If you're not watching on YouTube, this will sound pretty normal. Hopefully there's not too much rustling going on. I had an episode that was recorded for yesterday, but after a conversation yesterday with my baking assistant, Melissa, I decided that is a topic that I want to chat on. So the topic of today's episode is going to be about determining your capacity. So Melissa is beginning to grow her own microbakery from her home. And she asked me such a good question as she is beginning to take on her very first holiday orders this week. She asked me how I know where to cap my available inventory, specifically for pre-orders, and how I determine my capacity for that. And I thought that was such a helpful question. We had a really good conversation about it, but I thought it would be insightful to share some of my thought processes. And there are some really just concrete limits that I know and that help me limit my what's available for my pre-orders, but then also help me decide how much to bake for markets. And so I'll share that. There is some level of just learning as you go and figuring out for yourself. And it's not completely scientific, but I thought I would share guidelines that I use both for scheduling out and determining my capacity for my market bakes as well as for my pre-order bakes. Before I get too involved in the conversation here, I want to let you know that it is almost time for the Breadwinner Inner Circle to reopen for the next round of participants. This has been such a special group of people. My very first group of group coaching members are still have a couple weeks left. We're going to wrap up in January, and then enrollment's going to reopen for the next group, and we will kick back off in February. So right now, the wait list is open. If you want to be one of the very first people to sign up, to get notified when enrollment is open, to have access to early bird pricing, just go ahead and click down in the show notes or on the episode website, carolinebauer.com/episode 44, to get the link to join the waitlist. I've mentioned the Inner Circle before, and it's been a little while since I've talked about it, but it is a 12-week program where we just dive into every aspect of growing a thriving business. If you want to grow in a community of other bakers who understand exactly what you're going through, go ahead and join the waitlist and you'll have access to enroll as soon as it opens up in January. All right, let's dive in and let's talk about how to determine your capacity. I am going to talk both about capacity limits for pre-orders as well as for markets. So the very first thing is to create a schedule that lists out all of the immovable commitments that you have. This can be kid drop off and pick up, appointments, church commitments, meetings, whatever is just immovable time. Maybe it's even just your sit down family meal time. The commitments that are non-negotiable and that cannot be moved. Write those down and know that those are hard and fast and that you have to work everything else around those. Once you have your hard and fast schedule written down, the next step is to think about your concrete limitations within your baking capacity. So these are capacity limits such as how many loaves can you bake at a time in your oven? So for me, I can open bake 16 batards, oval loaves in one round. So I have my double oven with 2 baking steels per oven. So I have 8 loaves at a time per oven, which means a total of 16. And so when I am creating limits, when I'm putting together my menu on my Simply Bread app and getting that ready for pre-orders on Sundays, I limit my batard loaves in multiples of 16. So that might be 16 originals and 16 flavored loaves in any combination that adds up to 16. So that might be 8 sweet and 8 savory, which is usually the combination that I go with. Or my limit might be 32. And so I have some combination of my sweet and savory loaves that add up to 32. But I do not go over that multiple of 16 because that would mean an entire additional round in the oven. And so that is my hard and fast limit there. And then when I open up my pre-orders, I keep tabs for the first hour or two, and I see if one flavor's selling way faster than another, then I will lower the quantity available of the option that's selling slower and add a couple more to the option that's selling faster. So the flavor that they're looking for, and that doesn't sell out too fast, but I'm still limiting my quantity based on how many I can bake. The same principle applies for sandwich bread. So I can bake 24 loaves of sandwich bread in one round in my oven. That's the most sandwich bread I ever offered. I always cap it at 24 for market and for pre-orders. I also only have 24 loaf pans. And honestly, I don't think I'll buy more. The 24 is the quantity that works for me. Same principle for focaccia. I can bake 16 loaves of focaccia in one round in the oven. And so I cap focaccia at 16 for pre-orders as well as for market. So when you quantify things that way, that can simplify just the process of figuring out how many loaves to offer. Because if you go over X number of loaves, then that's pushing you into a full additional round in the oven and using that much more energy and that much more time. Another capacity limit could be your fridge. So for example, with me, I have my fridge and I max out at about 80 loaves in bannetons in there. And if I'm desperate, I have about room for 30 additional loaves overflow in our other secondary home fridge, but I usually max out right around that. And I could squeeze like 90 in there. So today I'm baking 88 loaves and squeeze in and overflowed a little bit into the spare fridge. But that's another limit. So consider how much room you have in your fridge. My mixer is another limitation. I can mix up 24 loaves at a time. And my sandwich breads and my batards are all 900 grams. So I use that as another way to calculate how many loaves to offer. So a lot of times, like when I'm opening my pre-orders, I might offer 48 total loaves because that's a multiple of 16 and it's 2 rounds in the mixer. So I might do 24 plain and then 24 inclusion. And so I would mix up a full batch of 24 in the mixer for my inclusion and separate it into 2 separate bins and my inclusions during the coil folds. And that's the next limitation is bins. How many bins do you have? How much can they hold? Make sure that you have enough bins to accommodate the dough that you're mixing. So my larger bins, I have 8 of them and I can fit 12 loaves worth of dough in each of those 8 bins. So 96 loaves. That's another hard and fast limit. Other things to consider are baking sheets. For a long time, I only had 2 baking sheets. And so that was another limitation. So if I knew I was offering a lot of cookies or scones, I knew that I was going to be doing lots and lots of rounds in the oven. And so I would lower the available quantity of those. And if that's something that you identify that people really want your cookies, but they are a bottleneck and taking forever and you don't have enough baking trays, then that can be an indicator that it's time to invest in some more baking trays. And then another hard and fast limitation can be your bannetons. Do you have enough bannetons to accommodate all of the dough that you need to cold proof? Do you have space for them in your fridge? Do you have shelving for them in your fridge? All of these things to consider and be realistic about your limitations. And so don't mix up dough for 30 loaves and realize that you only have 12 bannetons and then you're scrambling for whatever bowls or vessels you can find. If you only have enough realistic capacity for X number of loaves, then just go ahead and stop there and increase your capacity strategically as you add more equipment. So the next part of calculating your capacity is to determine how long each task takes. So the way I like to think about this is calculating my rate per hour of each item. So I know my personal limit right now per hour is 20 loaves. But when I was starting and baking with Dutch ovens, I could do 4 loaves per hour. I had 3 Dutch ovens, and my rotation meant that 4 loaves per hour was my rate. And so I actually went and I found the notebook that I used to plan out one of my very first markets when I was just beginning and baking out of Dutch ovens. And I had a few loaf pans, and I could bake 3 Dutch ovens at a time. And so I was mixing up 16 loaves, and I calculated that was going to take 4 hours. And loaf pans, I could bake 8 at a time. And so I was doing 24 of bread in loaf pans, and that was going to take me 3 hours. So I had a total of 7 hours ahead of me of bake time on the Friday before my market. And so having that number determined is really helpful because that can help you be realistic about the amount of time that it's going to take to bake each of your items. So your loaves per hour, think about your cookies per hour, whatever else you're baking, be realistic about how many hours it's going to take to do each cycle in the oven, and make sure that you're including the buffer time that it takes to get everything scored and pulled out of the fridge and prepared, and whether you're cutting parchment, all of that needs to be added into the time that it takes you per item. And then along the same lines is calculating how long it takes you to package each item. So for me, when I'm wrapping up these loaves, it takes me 20 seconds per loaf to wrap the bag, stick the bread in, fold down, and add the sticker. That is a process that I sped up because of ways that I've tweaked the process, and there's a lot of things. But again, be realistic about this. If it takes you 2 minutes per loaf for your packaging, that puts you at a rate of 1 hour to package 30 loaves. This process can really help open your eyes also to areas in your process where you can streamline and become more efficient too. So if it is taking you 2 minutes per loaf for your packaging, think about how you can cut that time down, even just by 30 seconds or a minute. If you're using multiple stickers, maybe you go down to just one single label with all your information on it. That was a change that I made that had a big impact. If you're adding extra decorative stickers, maybe eliminate those or see how you can incorporate those into a larger label. For example, if you're like adding an additional label with your logo, can you just put your logo on a larger sticker and use one sticker instead of two? So the process of calculating your time per item is not only necessary for calculating your capacity, but it also is insightful in terms of becoming more efficient. So once you have all of those factors figured out, so how long each task takes, how long everything takes to bake, and then how long your tasks take as far as packaging and prep, all of that, build in a buffer of at least 25%. My business coach would tell you to add a buffer of 50% of time because nothing goes as quickly as we think it will ever. And so just be realistic and add in some buffer time. A minimum of 25% is an absolute must. But if you want to reduce stress, add in a buffer time of an extra 50%. So if you think it's going to take you 1 hour to package everything, give yourself 1.5 hours because there will be things that take up extra time. You might forget, oh, wait, I don't have this label designed yet in Canva. I need to go open up my computer and I need to design it and download it. There are all these little things that we always forget to account for. And so the buffer time allows for that. It just minimizes stress so much. Okay, once you have your realistic time all calculated out, then the application of it is to reverse engineer. As you're determining your capacity, the way that you apply it all, for example, a market, if your market's on Saturday and you know that everything needs to be baked fresh within 24 hours, exactly what I'm doing today. So my market starts at 9 a.m. So I started baking after 9 a.m. this morning. But I know that on Saturday morning, I need to leave the house by 8, which means I need to have that car loaded by 7:30. That gives me a little bit of buffer time built in because I know my kids are going to need things. If I say I have to leave the house at 8 and have the car packed by 8, that means that I'm going to be pushing it to 8 or 8:30, and then I'm going to be scrambling to get to the market, and that's super stressful. Car packed by 7:30, that means that I need to have all my cookies that I'm going to bake early in the morning. That's the very last thing. I have to have them packaged by 6:30, which means they need to be out of the oven and cooled in time to start packaging at 6:30, which means I'm going to put them in the oven at 5:30 and then pull them out and put a fan on them to cool them down and start packaging by 6:30, maybe 7. And that gives me time to have the car loaded and leave the house by 8. There's a generous but realistic amount of buffer time built into that schedule so that things can go wrong because they will. Or not even wrong, but just those curveballs. The kid who needs a few extra hugs, or the glass of milk that spills and needs to be cleaned up. All of those things are going to happen. So just create your buffer for that. So again, for calculating for a market on Saturday, let's think about how you would think about your bake day on Friday. Sleep for me is my number one priority. I am unwilling to stay up super late. And so that means that everything has to happen in time for me to have a realistic bedtime. So for example, this evening, I want to have everything packaged by 8 p.m. I am giving myself about 2 hours to package everything. So that means I need to start around 6. I want to give everything at least 4 hours to cool. So that means everything needs to be out of the oven by 2 p.m. It is 2:10 right now, and I just turned off the oven for the final round. So I am adhering to this schedule. If I know that everything's going to take 5 hours to bake, then I start baking at 9 a.m., which means my oven turns on at 8:30. So that there is some wiggle room and some buffer time built in with the schedule that I know. So I know my rate of loaves per hour, and I use that plus how much time I know cookies and scones and all the things take, and created that schedule that is realistic for my own limitations. So the point of this conversation is, as always, not for you to compare yourself to my numbers because that's irrelevant, but for you to take the same strategy and apply it to whatever your capacity is. If your capacity is 12 loaves, that is perfect. Just use the same principles that I'm sharing to make sure that you have enough time to bake those 12 loaves and package them, have them cool before they need to be ready for pre-order or ready for market, whatever that is. The comparison is nasty and unfriendly and unhelpful. So we are anti-comparison. We're not about that here. Don't compare yourself to the bakers you're seeing on YouTube or on Instagram or me on a podcast, but simply use what serves you. So when you've got your realistic bake day scheduled, the continuation of your reverse engineering is your prep. So think about the day before. So for your dough day, calculate again, figure out your rate of how long it takes you to mix up each batch. Are you mixing by hand? And does it take 15 minutes to mix plus another 30-ish minutes for your combined stretch and folds per bin? And what is your rate for all your bins? Make sure that you're realistic and build in that buffer time and understand how long it's going to take for your mixing process. If your mixing is taking way too long or your proofing is going way too fast, there are some variables to tweak in there to speed it up or slow it down. So if it is just going way too fast when you're proofing these bins of bulk dough and you need to slow it down, for example, like to time it to be ready during nap time or something. Some variables to tweak would be using cooler or warmer water. Cooler water is going to slow down your bulk fermentation. Warmer water is going to speed it up. Same thing with starter. More starter is going to speed it up. Less starter is going to slow it down. So you can play around a little bit by adjusting the temperature of your water as well as the amount of starter that you're using if you need more or less time. So if you need to speed it up and have your fermentation done an hour sooner, try using a little bit warmer water. Tweak this strategically and a little bit slowly. Don't make a huge, massive change all at once, but practice one way multiple times so that you know how it's going to turn out, and then start making tweaks based on how you already know consistently one recipe or one formula is going to turn out. One more variable that you can tweak if you need to control your time a little better is after you've mixed up all your dough and done your stretch and folds, put those bins directly in the fridge. You might need to leave the lid off for a little bit to help them cool down because a large bin of dough with a cover on is going to proof you really fast. And so if you don't help it cool down quickly, or if the dough temperature is already really warm, it's likely to overproof a lot. So as long as you have As long as your dough temperature is low enough or you're able to cool it down quickly enough, and putting that full bin of dough in the fridge overnight and then shaping it the next day when you have more time can be another kind of variable to tweak there. And then the final part in the application of identifying your capacity is the last part of reverse engineer your process. So that would be like your prep day of whether that's Tuesday or Wednesday. And these are days are just placeholders. So put in the ones that apply to you. But things like pre-measuring your dry ingredients, that's something that doesn't take a ton of time and can be done at any time of the day. So you can do that like during the morning when your kids are doing breakfast, and then it's ready for the following day or even 2 days later when you need it. And then make sure that you remember to bulk up your starter. So feed your starter a couple days before and then have it ready to give it a nice large feed so that it's ready for your bulk dough day. And then one final variable that you can tweak is prepping your cookies and scones ahead of time when you have more margin in your schedule. So that this can be a good thing to do early in the week, stick them in the fridge and freezer so that they're ready and not something that you're scrambling to prepare in the midst of dough day or bake day. As with anything, there is so much room for personalizing this to your own rhythms and your own schedule. So make sure that you are taking what serves you and applying it in a way that applies to you and not simply trying to repeat my processes, but use the principles, use the kind of formulas to optimize your schedule. And hopefully, this is helpful in helping identify how much product to offer and where your limitations are in terms of your equipment and your capacity in your current season. I hope this has been super helpful. If you have questions or if you need support, as always, you can reach out to me over on Instagram. I'm Caroline Bauer _sourdough, and I would love to chat with you a little bit, give you some support. Again, that wait list for the Breadwinner Inner Circle is open, and you can sign up down in the show notes or carolinebauer.com/episode 44. In the Inner Circle, we talk about things like this. We talk about calculating our schedule in a way that serves our lifestyle and our rhythm. So if you want just some hands-on work on that, the Inner Circle could be a great fit for you. All right, that is it for today's episode. As always, if you haven't followed the show yet, make sure that you're doing that so that you don't miss an episode. They drop every Monday and Friday, every Monday and Thursday, unless if there's technical issues like this week when it's on a Friday. I will be back very soon with another episode, but until then, I'll be baking.